the Sportsline Podcast is on the air, and we certainly appreciate you checking us out on many of our CHCH media platforms. I'm Bubba O'Neill. My friends, isn't that Mr. Ford? The Sportsline Podcast is a space for the many extraordinary athletes, coaches, executives, and broadcasters who hail or have made their mark in Southern Ontario. Today, a hockey historian with many untold stories to tell. From his early days in the print business, he's been a lover and a promoter of local sports. He told stories for the Acton Free Press, Georgetown Independent, Burlington's Post for 16 years, the Hockey News, and currently the Bay Observer when he feels like it. Obviously, that's right here in Hamilton. Now, during those early days, Denis Gibbons covered international hockey, and he was one of the few that actually risked his freedom to give us a view from behind the Soviet Union's Iron Curtain. Years later, he penned a book titled My Door to Europe, which detailed those experiences. Folks, are you intrigued? I certainly am. Denis, it is awesome to have you with us. I mean, I just go through some of those things that you've done in your career. I'm jealous, but I can't wait to hear some of these stories. I mean, what has it been like for you? I mean, how long have you been writing for?
Well, I started, my career in 1969 at the Acton Free Press. Acton's my hometown. I eventually made my way to Burlington, and during that time in Burlington, I became very interested in international hockey, and I got hired to work at 7 Winter Olympic hockey tournaments.
Wow.
Took my holidays from the Post for NBC and ABC and CBS. Worked with a lot of top broadcasters, Mike Emmerich and Eddie Olczyk, John Davidson, Jeremy Roenick, Mike Milbury. And also, while I was at the Post, I was able to go on 4 excursions to Europe with the Burlington Bantam and midget teams, and that was the days of the Soviet Union. We played in Czechoslovakia in 1983, and I got detained by the secret police under the pretense of taking photos of a Soviet military base. So that was pretty scary.
That is completely, totally scary, and it's certainly in a time where, I mean, it just wasn't like it was today. But we're going to get into that. But I want to kind of talk to you a little bit, or first of all, about the local sports scene and how you did have a love for local sports. I mean, I remember back in my high school football playing days in the mid-'80s, like if a guy like Dave Rashford showed up or Kevin Nagel, any of those guys, like that was a big deal. I mean, we don't give the coverage now, especially in the newspaper. It's just not the same anymore. But when those days in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, you guys were the big dogs.
Yes, I enjoyed every minute of it. I started at a very small newspaper in Acton. Everybody knew everybody in town, and I moved to Burlington and didn't know so many people. But I always enjoyed working at the grassroots, meeting the athletes themselves. Unlike some professional athletes who are a little bit disturbed when you try to interview them, the kids in high school are just delighted to be asked for an interview. And it was a pleasure to do that all those years.
Well, I remember seeing my name in the Burlington Post back in those mid-'80s with the Assumption Crusaders. You know, we won a couple of championships. And, I mean, I still have those articles to this day. I never threw them away. So special, so special. Now, you talked about international hockey and your love for it. We don't even think about it these days because it's just so normal now with many of the tournaments that go on for men and women. But back in those days when someone like the Burlington Cougars made a trip across the Atlantic and into Europe and into a place like Czechoslovakia or Russia, that was a big deal.
Well, in 1982, we took the Burlington Bantam team, sponsored by Cougar Shoes. Mr. Walter Settelbar, who was the father of Ron Settelbar, played for the Leafs. And the Bantam team was the first Canadian team ever to win a tournament in the Soviet Union, which was the Soviet Union in those days. We won in Minsk, which is now the capital of Belarus. And a couple of those players were successful later. Dan Curry went on, played briefly for the Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings. He played for a short time on a line with Wayne Gretzky. Paul Constantin won a NCAA championship at Lake Superior State. The captain was Rod Anthony, who played University of Windsor lately. And that team, after we came home, made it to the OMHA finals, lost in a 5-game series to Peterborough. So some great hockey players on that team.
So you're writing these stories about this team that is, again, playing hockey teams at the highest level in the Soviet Union. Can you kind of describe to us, again, because there's the internet and there's just so many reasons to understand what we call Russia is right now. But at that time, there was a dark cloud. We didn't know much about those people, let alone the country or the cities. What was it like for you to get into those places?
Well, going into the country at the airport, going through customs was a long delay. The officers would check your bags. The Soviet people, of course, didn't have many goods of their own, and if some of the officers saw something in their bag that they liked, they would say, "It's illegal to bring that home." And they would take it, then they would just take it home for themselves.
Wow. You got into a little bit of what was going on with the policia in Czechoslovakia. Can you get into detail about what really happened in that situation?
This was the year later, 1983. We were playing, this time it was the Burlington Midget team. We were playing in a tournament in a little town named Szumperk near the Polish border. And there was a Soviet military base there. Our guide, who was Czech, before we came into town, warned us, don't bother going near that. You know, we're here to play hockey. They do their thing and we do our thing. But I thought I was bigger than the average citizen, so I took a stroll out around to see the Soviet base for myself. All of a sudden, a little car pulled up, and a guy got out in a pork pie hat. Looked something like something out of Laurel and Hardy. I thought, well, these people are very nice. They sent a car for me to take me back to the hotel. Anyway, he showed the credentials. It was the Czech secret police. He said, you have to come with me. And they accused me of taking pictures of the Soviet base, but I didn't take any, but I was thinking about it. But anyway, they took me back, and we had a small trial in the office of the headquarters, and they eventually cleared me, but they had me what is called under house arrest. That is to say, I could stay in the hotel, I could go to the hockey games, but I could not leave town until my name was cleared. Finally, I convinced them that I was there only for the hockey tournament, and the thing that finally convinced them that I wasn't a spy, I was wearing a bright orange and blue jacket, which are the colors of Burlington Minor Hockey, and they thought no self-respecting spy would be going around in an orange and blue jacket.
You know, and here you are just trying to learn a little bit about the country. I mean, I think that would be just in a natural curiosity for many people. Be honest with me. When you were detained, were you scared?
Oh, I asked to go to the washroom. I did have to go to the washroom. I thought we were on the bottom floor. And we went, so I got to the washroom. I saw a window. I seriously considered going out the window, and then I looked, and we were on the second floor. So that changed my mind.
Absolutely. Wow. 1986 World Hockey Championships. You're covering that. In Moscow, the nuclear explosion in Chernobyl, something that shook up the world, and you were right there experiencing it.
That's right. I was staying in the Cosmos Hotel in Moscow. I got a call from Lawrence Martin. Lawrence Martin at that time was the Globe and Mail correspondent in Moscow. He said, "Did you hear about the nuclear explosion in Chernobyl?" And I said, "No, what happened?" And he told me, and he said it's 500 miles away, but anyway, the tournament continued because we were 500 miles away in Moscow, but the Soviets did not publish anything in the newspaper until 3 days later.
Wow.
And the experts said that if I had been any closer than 500 miles, I could have been seriously affected by the radiation.
And this is something that actually shook up the world. We had never had a nuclear explosion of that type. And again, I like the fact that you explain the fact that Russia were not forthcoming in information.
Right.
And that had to be, again, I'll use the word again, pretty frightening.
Yes. And then in 1989, another major incident. I was in Moscow covering hockey when the Berlin Wall fell. And once again, I only found out about it. I went down one night to the British Embassy to get a hamburger and a Coke, and I read it in a British newspaper. But once again, nothing in the Soviet press for 2 or 3 days.
Is there a reason for that? I guess, again, we're so different right now. Information travels like that, whether it's in a newspaper, on television, or on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Everything was just, you had to be either there or you as you said, you didn't know. Was there any reason that you could understand why, again, the Soviet Union were so not forthcoming with information?
Well, they didn't want to get the people stirred up. They didn't want any unnecessary uprisings until they got the situation under control. And of course, in the case of the fall of the Berlin Wall, that was a stroke against the Soviet Union, and they wouldn't, for political reasons, wouldn't want their people to know about that either.
Kind of a show of weakness, I guess, for their part. That's the way they saw it.
Yes, yes.
All right. Wow, this is just incredible. I mean, and I lived through some of this as a child, and I remember how hard-hitting it was in the news in Canada and the United States. But something that really I remember so well, because I've been a Buffalo Sabres fan my whole entire life, was a night in 1989, and I'm just watching Channel 7 News like so many of us here that are so close to the border. And there's this story about this outstanding hockey player, Alex McGillney, who was playing for the juniors at the time, and he was playing for the country at the World Hockey Championships, I believe in Stockholm, and
that's right.
Oh my goodness, he defects. And I don't think people understand how big that word is, defecting to Buffalo to play in the National Hockey League with the Sabres. And again, you were right there for it.
Yes. I was there to cover the World Championship for CFRB and Broadcast News, and I knew personally Igor Dmitriev, who was the assistant coach of the Soviet team. We'd become friends long before that, and the Soviet team was staying in a little village called Dalarno outside of Stockholm, and during the tournament, I asked if I could go out there and talk to some of the players. He said he didn't think it would be wouldn't be in the best interest of the team, and that Tikhonov, the head coach, would frown upon it. Anyway, that ended that story. As I was flying home, I got the news that McGillney had left the hotel in Dalarno and had met with Jerry Meehan of the Sabres, and was about to defect and fly home on another aircraft. And I was stunned because nobody had ever defected before. And he came to Buffalo. He was staying in Amherst, New York. And Steve Dryden from the Hockey News asked me to go down as a resource person to visit him. And after we did an interview just a few days after he had defected in Amherst.
Did he speak any English or at the time?
Oh, yes, he spoke some English.
Okay.
He, of course, he had played in the '88 Olympics in Calgary, and he'd also won a gold medal at the '89 World Juniors in Alaska. So he'd played in some minor hockey tournaments in the province of Quebec too. So he'd been there a few times.
Again, because of the time, and I have to keep reiterating this because this is so incredibly different right now. What he did Is it fair to say he risked his life doing?
Definitely. I believe that there were some repercussions against his family. He left his family, of course, back in Russia. He came from a city called Habarovsk in the Far East near Japan. And I think for a short time there were some repercussions against his family. And he was not allowed to go back. However, just shortly after that, the Soviet Union broke up, and after a few years, they decided that they would allow him to go back, and he went back and visited his family. But in the early stages, it was very serious for his family, of course, yes.
Guess it kind of opened some doors for a lot of players to play in the National Hockey League. I think of a Sergei Fedorov, someone like that. The doors opened wide, I mean, without that kind of danger. Yet, I guess for some, and I think I still see it a little bit when you listen and read some of the stories with Alex Ovechkin, there is the affection for the government and their country, and it is very important to them. But as what Mogilny did, not only did it open doors, there always has to be a first, but I'll tell you, what a gutsy move by him.
And the thing that surprised me, he had a fantastic career in the NHL, I think scoring over 470 goals, just short of 500. He has been totally overlooked every year in voting for the Hall of Fame.
Unbelievable to me.
And
Unbelievable.
I always felt that it was because of his attachment to although he wasn't a supporter of the government, but the fact that he was a Soviet player, that they're ignoring him for that reason, and it's not fair.
I'd agree with you. Your career is taking you to places like we said, the Burlington Post, which we're so proud of, and locally, and as you said, the Hockey News. But you also work for some of the bigwigs, CBC, and the big three in the United States, when maybe hockey wasn't, I mean, they were still kind of learning hockey a little bit, ABC, NBC, and of course, the CBS with the Winter Olympics 2014 had to be a big one for you.
Yes. The tournament was played in subtropical weather conditions. Sochi is located on the Black Sea, and it's far enough south that there was no snow, even flowers growing, and temperatures in the low 70s. Mm-hmm. But the tournament itself was a bit of a disappointment because Canada won it easily. They walked right through it. Russia by that time was a disappointment in being eliminated by Finland in the semifinals. I got to see President Putin in person at the United States-Soviet game, and he was quite disappointed because T.J. Oshie scored several times in the shootout to beat his team right in front of him.
They could be repeat shooters, that's right.
Yeah.
And you're working... I mean, you're working, obviously, writing and doing that kind of thing, but you're also lending your hand of hockey knowledge to some of those big stations, and you're meeting, as you said, off the top. I mean, guys like Doc Emmerich and Don Cherry, like some big wigs in the hockey business.
Well, I had studied McMaster, studied Russian language at McMaster in evening classes. So when I was in Sochi, I not only go on the internet, but I would go out and buy the newspapers and translate some of the information so that they would get special background on the Russian team. And before every game, I would prepare Doc and Eddie Olczyk with the pronunciations of the name and of the names and any other information that they required that would enhance the broadcast.
How good were they at the pronunciations at that time?
They did very well.
Really?
They did very well, yeah.
You came driving, also part of that too?
That was in 1988. That was quite a bit earlier. That was my first Olympics in Calgary. Al Michaels was the play-by-play man. Wow. He's very famous. Mm-hmm. Still going, I think, almost the age of 80, maybe over now.
Oh, he's over 80 now.
Yes.
Doing the NFL.
Ken Dryden was his color man, and I made my debut there. And Soviets won that gold medal. Dave King had the Canadian team, was still basically an amateur team, mm-hmm. augmented by professionals, but it was a thrill to work with those two there too. Yeah.
You know, you've probably traveled so much that you've gained an affection for not just Canada, North America, Europe, but the entire world. And it's, from what I believe, it's led you to many humanitarian work and that you've helped refugees from around the world. What was your passion behind that?
I had a chance to see what life was like behind the Iron Curtain, and in those days it wasn't very pretty. A lot of poverty, and people didn't have many things to their name. So now that I'm retired, I thought I'd dedicate the rest of my life to helping refugees. And so through our church in Holy Rosary in Burlington, we had a refugee committee, and I've helped to bring over a family, a single mother and two boys from Afghanistan, a single man from Sudan in Africa, and also a single mother and two kids from Haiti. And I enjoy mixing with people of other countries and learning their languages, and any way that I can help them out, I'm glad to do it, because I've got lots of time on my hands now.
But it's a real example of, we spend so much of our lives taking, and I've heard this from everyone that has had the opportunity, but the opportunity to give will always feel better.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm. There's nothing like giving it. No matter how many goods you have of your own or riches, you'll never get the satisfaction you get from helping somebody else and seeing the smile on their face. And they're appreciative.
I'm sure they are.
Yes.
As you said, so many of these people don't even have the basics of life that we just really take for granted, quite honestly.
Yes.
I guess I have to ask you this question. What's next?
Well, I'm 81 years old now, and I spend, besides driving refugees to doctor's appointments, to their soccer games and basketball, my big job now is trying to clear out my office at home and unloading a lot of the books I've collected over the years. So if I go upstairs and my wife doesn't have too big a mess to clean up.
You have to. She can't be cleaning up your mess.
Yeah. However, I still keep my hand in it, in the sense that I read the Russian sports pages on the internet every day, and Czech as well. And I still dabble a bit in languages, because I also studied Spanish and Japanese and German at McMaster at night too. So it's been a big hobby of mine.
I guess, and I've heard this before, that because learning languages is such a difficult thing, that quite to the basics of it, it keeps our brain going, does it not?
Absolutely.
Right.
That's very important, because dementia can set in at any time, and that's a good defense against dementia.
So many of the gems that we've talked about, and folks, so many more, trust me, are all in this gem. You have to be pretty proud of this book, aren't you?
Yes. It took me 4 years to write it. Now, I wasn't going 24 hours a day. I was just picking at it here and there. But it's a memoir, and it's left, when I'm gone, it's left for everybody to see what I experienced anyway.
Well, for someone like myself that, again, I was younger, obviously, but experienced and understood what the world was like compared to how it is now, I certainly appreciate you writing this, and I can't wait to dig in a little bit deeper into the book. The stories are unbelievable. In some cases, sometimes frightening, but I'm glad you were able to put that together, and your writing is just so on point. Thank you for doing that book. Thank you for coming into the Sportsline Podcast and giving us just a little sneak peek. And again, from someone that grew up in the area and played local sports and saw people like you, writing for the local papers, I say thank you. And I know I would say that on behalf of many people. You guys did fantastic work, and we will always appreciate it. It's a special part of our lives.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Bubba, and it was a pleasure to cover you when we were playing for Assumption, right?
Yeah, the Assumption Crusaders.
Okay.
Back in the day. The first Catholic high school back in the day.
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming in, partner. Hey, that's your Sportsline Podcast for the day. And as you've just seen and heard, we love talking sports. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote the Sportsline Podcast, do want to hear from you. Please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. If you have something to say, we appreciate your comments always. For the outstanding people that make the Sportsline Podcast what it is and make it possible, thank you so much. And we'll see you on Friday.